everyone! My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are actually doing something that is totally different from what I had planned, but I was just browsing over on the BDSM subreddit r/BDSM community, and I saw a trending hot topic that I just had to speak about. And this is coming from a post that I believe was titled, "How Can We Destigmatize Brats?" And of course, being someone that has been talking about BDSM and bratting on my channel for many years at this point, I do have my thoughts and opinions about an answer to that question. But before we get into my thoughts on the subject, we should first take a look at exactly what the post is saying. So, yesterday's discussion on bratting. Not gonna lie, the comment section was a little depressing for me, a brat. I know personally, I've really struggled with feeling seen in the BDSM community. When someone asks you your role and you say you're a brat, 9 times out of 10, you're met with a, "Oh, so you're not a submissive?" Or, "Ugh, those are fake subs." Or, "Oh, so you abuse your dom?" And it is exhausting. Yes, abusive brats exist, just like abusive doms exist. There are those in this role who use it to just be disrespectful and have no understanding of what it actually means. They violate boundaries and consent and give us all a bad rap. But here's my question. Why are we treating the brat community in general like it's invalid because of that smaller group? We don't say that doms aren't valid because there are abusive ones. And yet, you'll be hard-pressed to find a group in this community who gets stigmatized and invalidated more than brats. So, how can we address this as a whole community? What will it take to break this brats are bad stigma that's so deeply ingrained in a lot of places, and instead focus on rooting out the toxic individuals? No one should have to constantly defend the validity of their role. So, can we please start working towards a solution? The community will only be healthier for it. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what that would look like. So, I wasn't online when this happened, so I'm not 100% sure which post the original poster here is referring to from the day before, but I believe it is one that is titled, "Why Are So Many Tops Adverse to Bratty Subs?" which just says simply, "We aren't that bad, are we?" And it kind of comes across like a silly, like, half-joking post, especially with the use of an emoji, which by the way is relatively uncommon on Reddit compared to other social media, which just sort of adds to that kind of jokey flavor. But a lot of people did actually take that question seriously and used it as an opportunity to talk about why they don't actually enjoy playing with brats. You had some people, for example, in the top replies say things like, "Hey, I'm autistic, and the unclear and sometimes contradictory communication of brats just doesn't work for me." You had other people pointing out that the defiance of bratting was triggering for them, or even that being with a brat in a long-term relationship made their mental health much worse compared to other BDSM relationships they had had. And I think as a community, having these conversations is really important because we really genuinely do not often give tops the space they need to communicate either amongst each other or in the community as a whole about when their relationships go bad or even become abusive, because frankly there is very much this stereotype or this idea that, well, if you're the dom, like, how can things go badly for you? You're in control. Why can't you just order them to stop what they're doing? Why can't you just be powerful enough to stop what's going on? And it's not that simple, and I don't want to get dragged down into that particular argument, but I will just say this, that yes, people who are on the left side of the slash can be abused. They can be in bad and toxic relationships. And that is just part of life. No matter your identity, no matter your BDSM role, no matter your gender, your sexuality, anyone can be in a bad relationship, and people deserve to have spaces to talk about that. And I'm glad there was at least a forum to have that conversation. But unfortunately, whenever you have something come up where someone says a sort of like a side note, the person who abused me did X kind of role in BDSM. Or when I was in a relationship that involved X, it didn't go well for me. People have trouble understanding that those statements aren't saying all people who do this thing are bad. This thing is inherently toxic to all relationships. Instead of realizing that that is just a unique factor of that person's individual experience, that is not attempting to paint a broad brush. And when you do open up those doors, you do get people who come in and say, yeah, you're right, brats are really toxic and bratting is never real submission, and people who are brats shouldn't be allowed to do BDSM. And it's like, whoa, slow down there. That's not the conversation we're having currently. You're taking this about 20 steps too far. And so when you have that redirection from a legitimate conversation about why something doesn't work for everyone into X category of people are just bad, you then are going to get a response like we saw from this post we are discussing currently, which is there can be a stigma that bratting is not real submission, that brats are bad people, etc., etc., etc. And I certainly know what that person is talking about. I know where their perspective is coming from, not even being a brat myself, but being someone who talks about it online. A lot of times when I mention it, I do get at least one or two people that have really out their opinions about bratting, usually to the effect of like, I could never be with a brat. Brats are actually just emotional abusers and narcissists. And again, that statement I think is just taking things way too far. You definitely get people that have this mentality that because they don't personally like brats, that must mean that no one should like brats. And this isn't really helped by the fact that we do have some prominent educators, looking at you, Michelle Fegatofi, with your published books, that go on rants on their popular blogs about how brats aren't real submissives, which are only giving ammunition to further this narrative and further this stereotype. And being someone who identifies as a brat, I imagine that seeing that kind of thing is really hurtful, especially when it is part of your identity and seems or feels like or is part of who you are. Where I initially take issue though with this post is when they make the statement, you'll be hard pressed to find a group in this community that gets invalidated and stigmatized more than brats, because I can actually very easily think of several groups that are more widely stigmatized and hated than brats. The first one that I think of would be male identified submissives, because they are basically the public punching bag within the kink community as well as in vanilla media. It can get pretty nasty. You have a lot of very negative, very deep-seated stereotypes about male submissives being weak-willed and kind of creepy and gross and unworthy of love and affection, and just overall being like very off-putting people, which is certainly not the case. And of course, I think the biggest one would be littles and age players. There are several multi-million view documentaries that have been made about littles that are not flattering and usually involve the people that are the subject of the documentary being lied to by the producers in order to go along with what's happening. And then when you go to the comment section on those videos, it is just basically a solid wall of verbal harassment. Not to mention the people that have made YouTube reaction videos that look at this in detail and just act totally disgusted the whole time. Really big streamers that talk about, oh, that's so gross, that must be like pedophilia. It is very, very widely reviled. Not to mention, on top of that, you do have something kind of similar, though to a much lesser degree, happening with pet players, where they are stereotyped as wanting to participate in bestiality, or that they believe that they are an actual animal trapped in a human's body, neither of which is generally the case. And so I do think there are many examples of groups that are more widely stigmatized than brats. I would say, though, an important point of distinction is where this disdain is coming from. I really don't think that bratting is on the vanilla radar, like, at all. You have littles and rope bondage tops and femdoms that have documentaries and interviews about them galore on the internet. And that just, doesn't seem to be the case with brats. I'm sure there's at least one documentary that involves someone that also happens to be a brat, but I don't think that bratting by itself seems to provoke enough of the disgust and horror that is required for truly to make a documentary about it, which I think that they should be thankful they can't escape from that radar. That being said, though, when the disdain you are facing is coming from within the community as opposed to without, I imagine that is much, much more hurtful. So then, removing the vanilla perception from the equation, what about if we only look at what happens within the BDSM community? Is it more widely stigmatized just within the area of BDSM and not by outsiders? I do still think in that case that age players and littles are more widely misunderstood and disallowed from events. I certainly think there is more of a deep-seated bias against male submissives compared to brats. But, you know, I'll be frank here in my assessment. Basically, my entire local community under the age of 45 is ran by switchy brats. And so, of course, they are going to be more widely accepted because the level of destruction they could cause with glitter is something that I do not even want to ponder. But jokes aside, I do still want to recognize that community spaces can be very different from each other. It is very much a local thing. Though with the advent of the internet, it is much easier to talk to each other, no matter if we live in San Francisco or Milan or Paris or what have you. And so that can make it seem like the BDSM community is much more interconnected and similar on average than it actually is. Whereas in real life, things are still pretty segmented. If you have 2 or 3 people in a prominent enough group in a local space, they can easily shift the balance towards whatever their individual kink is. Be that age play, be that bratting, be that rope bondage, be that blood play. It can really just take only a handful of people to change your perception of what is normal for the entire BDSM community, when what it really is about like what it's like in Sarasota, you know? And it's important to not just assume that because something is like this locally for us, that it's the same thing for everyone who does BDSM everywhere, or that it is in any way representative of the genuine average. And on the side of maybe promoting stigma against brats, you could have, for example, the guy who runs the local munch be somebody that is a very outspoken anti-brat person, and because of that, their opinion is going to flavor what a lot of new people entering the community through that venue think about bratting. That can certainly change things in that local space. Now, acknowledging that this is on Reddit, of course, I believe that at least part of this sentiment is directed towards the internet. And just don't ever judge a community by the way it looks on the internet. Because with the way that social media works, the most extreme views tend to get amplified. People are rewarded for getting heated basically by nothing, and misinformation gets spread as easily as fact. Not to mention that this is more a problem with BDSM in particular. If you have one person that states something confidently enough in a blog post, 20 years later, you will get people who quote that as a source without any kind of other supporting evidence. I'm looking at you, 1999 Angel Fire websites where people were writing about like all trainee submissives wear blue collars or whatever the fuck, and people still believe that shit for some reason, even again if there's no evidence to support it. But that being said, getting back more to the point, just because people online are getting really fired up about bratting doesn't actually mean that is representative of what the real life BDSM community is like. And going through the replies to this post and to the one that came before it, you certainly get the impression that what's more accurate is that a lot of doms are not personally into brats and choose not to play with brats because their energies are not compatible, not because they think that brats are inherently bad people or are toxic. But getting back to the post at hand, let's see if we can actually answer the question here. What can we do to destigmatize brats and bratting? And I'm sure my answer will shock absolutely no one when I say education. And there's a really good reason for this that's not I'm a professional educational YouTuber. My reason for this is because bratting tends to be a very intuitive form of BDSM. It can be very natural for people, and it tends to be something that newer people go towards without really thinking or knowing how to seek out resources related to it. At the same time, you don't really see classes about it or conferences or so on in the way that you, for example, see intro classes to flogging or to submission more generally. And because of that, people don't really know how to go about it. You have people guessing and guessing badly at where the boundaries are. How do you negotiate bratting? Should you negotiate for bratting? Should tops have a safe word when they play with a brat? How far is too far? What should you do for aftercare? What punishments can you do in order to deter a behavior? What is punishment? How can you tell the difference between punishment and punishment? Lots and lots of unanswered questions. Actually, I would liken this maybe more to something like humiliation when it comes to the level of education required in order to do this ethically. With something like humiliation, there are literally 1,001 landmines you could potentially step on. And without the education you need in order to discern where the landmines could be, you are very likely to step on one without realizing you're about to do it. And that can lead to damage and hurt feelings on both sides of the play equation. And unfortunately, a lot of people do come into this role with a lot of big misconceptions about bratting and about the lifestyle more generally. Especially, and in particular, the idea that submissives are the ones that are supposed to have limits and safe words, but not the top, when that is very much not the case. So you have people that say things like, oh, it's just bratting, what's the big deal? Not acknowledging the very real harm they can cause with their behavior to the people around them. And because there is that lack of education, that lack of understanding, they don't realize there's a separation between negotiated pushing of boundaries and outright breaking boundaries. They can't feel or understand the difference between some light, playful ribbing that was negotiated in advance and somebody just randomly saying out of nowhere to their dom, you are absolutely the worst dom ever. You have tiny little chicken arms and you couldn't even bruise me if you tried. You're so stupid. Just in front of all of their friends at the local munch. And not being able to tell the difference between those two things is very dangerous. Or worse, you have people that brat to complete strangers out of nowhere like it's some kind of advanced flirting maneuver. Some people, without further clarification, think that bratting is about making their partners legitimately angry as opposed to a delicate dance of roleplay and tongue-in-cheek responses that were talked about ahead of time. And while there are definitely some people that use bratting as a veil for their emotional and relational problems in the same way that there are bad doms who use doming as a way to veil their own issues, I really do think that the majority of problems related to bratting could be solved with actually having some education, with having good representation of what that role looks like, or even maybe a book entirely dedicated to the subject that people could recommend to newbies. That is where I really see the primary solution coming from. I think it is always important to remember things like your kink is not my kink, but your kink is still okay, especially when it comes to kinks that we don't personally have. But you know, in the entire time that I have been doing BDSM, going to classes, going to conferences, reading books, all of that stuff, I have maybe seen 1 or 2 classes about bratting, and that's at a convention that costs like $250 for tickets for the weekend, not including travel and hotel fees. So of course, if you are someone that is brand new and you are just trying out BDSM, and again, because bratting is this more sort of natural approach, you are likely to be newer and not know the resources that are at your disposal. It's just going to cause some issues, you know? And there's a bunch that I couldn't get into in this video. I didn't really know how I felt about like showing other people's replies to this. So if you want to check out some of the other responses to this post, some other ideas, you can check out the thread down below. I'll just again, I'll put the name in there. Sharing links on YouTube, especially for anything BDSM related, is really dicey. I've gotten channel strikes for linking to the most innocuous things before, so I'll see what I can do about that. But yeah, there's certainly more of a conversation to have here as far as ethical bratting, how we have these conversations, what the solutions might actually look like. So with that in mind, I would love to know what you all think about this in a comment down below. I would love to hear your thoughts, especially as a brat. If you are one yourself, I would love to know again what you think about this. If you have not already and you want to make sure to not miss out on any other videos from me, you can go ahead and subscribe, because I make videos twice a week about all sorts of kink and BDSM related subjects. And finally, if you really enjoyed this, if you want to support what I do, the best way you can do that is with Patreon. A link to that will be down below. If you do already support over there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.